Julian Davenport had it all: wealth, power, and a picture-perfect fiancée. But when he was left at the altar in front of New York's elite, humiliation threatened to break him. Enter Amara Johnson, an event staffer with a heart of gold who saw the man behind the fortune. Neither expected their worlds to collide, but fate had other plans. Would love bridge the gap between their lives, or would society tear them apart? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel sparkled with crystal chandeliers and white roses. 300 guests dressed in their finest attire sat in perfect rows, waiting for the moment when Julian Davenport would marry Victoria Reynolds, the woman everyone thought was his perfect match. Julian stood at the altar, his tall frame impeccable, in his custom tuxedo. At 38, he had built an empire from nothing. Davenport Industries had made him one of the richest men in New York, and today was supposed to be the crowning achievement in his personal life. "For you okay?" whispered Robert, his best man and childhood friend. Julian nodded, though his stomach churned with unexpected anxiety. He'd dated Victoria for 2 years. She was beautiful, sophisticated, and came from the right family. Their marriage made sense on paper, so why did he feel this strange hesitation? The string quartet began playing the wedding march. The guests rose to their feet. The double doors opened at the back of the ballroom, but instead of Victoria in her wedding gown, her father Harold Reynolds appeared alone, his face ashen. Julian's heart dropped. Something was wrong. Harold approached Julian quickly, speaking in a hushed tone. "She's asking to see you, in the bridal suite." Whispers rippled through the crowd as Julian followed Harold out of the ballroom and down the hall. When he opened the door to the bridal suite, Victoria stood by the window in her wedding gown, still breathtaking but with tears streaking her makeup. "Victoria, what's happening?" Julian asked, his voice tight. She couldn't meet his eyes. "I can't do this, Julian." "Can't do what?" "If you're nervous, that's normal." "No." She finally looked up. "I can't marry you." The words hit him like a physical blow. "What are you talking about? There are 300 people out there." "I know, and I'm sorry." She twisted the 5-carat engagement ring on her finger. "But I'd rather hurt you now than trap us both in a marriage that isn't right." Julian's mind raced. Is there someone else? Victoria's silence was all the answer he needed. "Who is he?" Julian demanded, a mixture of pain and anger building inside. "Him?" "It doesn't matter," she said softly, slipping the ring from her finger and placing it on the dressing table. "What matters is I can't pretend anymore." Julian stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. Victoria walked past him to the door, pausing for just a moment. "I'm truly sorry, Julian. You deserve someone who loves you completely." And then she was gone, leaving Julian alone with the crushing weight of public humiliation and private betrayal. Down the hall, Amara Johnson moved efficiently between tasks, oblivious to the drama unfolding in the bridal suite. At 32, she had worked for elite events for 5 years and had helped coordinate countless weddings for the wealthy. She was restocking a tray of champagne flutes when she noticed the sudden commotion. Victoria's father was addressing the guests. His voice strained as he announced the wedding would not be taking place today. Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Amara's heart sank for the unknown groom. "Poor guy," whispered Tina, another event assistant. "What happened?" Amara asked. "Bride got cold feet, apparently. Left him standing at the altar." Amara winced. In all her years working these events, she'd never seen a last-minute cancellation quite this dramatic. As the guests began reluctantly filing out, Amara continued her work, directing the catering staff to begin packing up the untouched food. The reception that would never happen had been planned down to the last detail. A 10-course dinner, a 7-tier cake, and a live band that was now awkwardly packing up their instruments. An hour later, most of the guests had left. Amara was gathering centerpieces in the now empty ballroom when she heard a sound from the small anteroom off to the side. She hesitated, then went to investigate. She found Julian Davenport sitting alone in a chair, his bow tie undone, a glass of scotch in his hand. She recognized him from the photos she'd seen during event preparation. He was staring blankly ahead, the picture of devastation. Amara knew she should leave him to his privacy, but something about his expression touched her. No one should be alone after such humiliation. "Excuse me, Mr. Davenport, would you like me to bring you anything?" she asked gently. Julian looked up, seeming to notice her for the first time. "Unless you can turn back time, I don't think there's anything anyone can do for me today." His attempt at a smile failed miserably. "I'm sorry about what happened," Amara said sincerely. Julian laughed bitterly. "Are you? Most people are probably enjoying the spectacle. The great Julian Davenport finally taken down a peg." "I don't think anyone's enjoying your pain," Amara replied. "And you don't have to pretend to be strong, not right now." Something in her simple words seemed to reach him. His carefully controlled expression crumbled, and the raw pain in his eyes made Amara's heart ache. "I don't even know what happened," he said, his voice rough. "Everything was perfect, or I thought it was." Amara hesitated, then sat in the chair opposite him. "Sometimes perfect on paper doesn't mean perfect in reality. 2 years of my life," Julian said, "and she couldn't even tell me to my face until our wedding day." "Some people aren't brave enough to be honest until they're backed into a corner," Amara observed. Julian studied her for the first time, taking in her simple black uniform dress with the Elite Events logo. "You're not what I expected from event staff." Amara smiled slightly. "And what did you expect?" "I don't know, not wisdom, I guess. I've seen a lot of weddings, some happy, some less so." She stood up. "Would you like me to leave you alone?" Julian surprised himself by saying, "No, actually, talking to you is the only thing that's made me feel slightly human in the past hour." "Then I'm happy to stay a while," she said, sitting back down. "I'm Amara, by the way. Amara Johnson. Julian Davenport. But I guess you knew that." "Hard not to when your name is on all the place cards," she said with a gentle smile. For the first time that day, Julian felt something other than devastation. This woman, this stranger, looked at him with kindness rather than pity. She didn't seem impressed by his wealth or status, and right now that felt strangely refreshing. "So, Amara Johnson, tell me something that has nothing to do with weddings or betrayal." She thought for a moment. "I'm taking night classes for my teaching degree. 3 more semesters to go." "Teaching? What subject?" "Elementary education." "I love working with kids." As they talked, Julian gradually felt the tight knot in his chest loosen slightly. Amara told him about her small apartment in Queens, her passion for teaching, and her niece and nephew, whom she adored. Her life was so different from his world of board meetings and billion-dollar deals, yet there was something captivating about her warm brown eyes and the way she spoke about her dreams. "Mr. Davenport," Robert appeared at the doorway. "The car is ready whenever you are." Julian nodded, suddenly aware of how long he'd been talking with Amara. He stood up, straightening his jacket. "Thank you for being kind when you didn't have to be." Amara smiled. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Julian said with certainty. "They wouldn't have." He hesitated, then added, "I hope your teaching dreams come true, Amara Johnson." She nodded, feeling a strange reluctance to see him go. "And I hope tomorrow is better than today, Mr. Davenport." "Julian," he corrected. "After everything, I think you can call me Julian." He left with Robert, and Amara returned to her work, telling herself the fluttering in her stomach was just sympathy for a man experiencing one of the worst days of his life. Nothing more. The next morning, Julian woke in his penthouse apartment with a pounding headache and the crushing memory of the previous day's humiliation. His phone had hundreds of notifications, messages from friends, business associates, and worst of all, several missed calls from his mother. Caroline Davenport had warned him about Victoria. "She loves your money, not you," his mother had said. Julian had dismissed her concerns as old-fashioned snobbery. Now he wondered if she'd seen something he'd been blind to. He was about to call her back when his assistant, Megan, rang. "I've managed to keep the press at bay for now," she said without preamble. "But you should know Victoria gave an exclusive interview to Page 6. It's not flattering." Julian closed his eyes. "How bad?" "She's claiming you were controlling." and emotionally unavailable, that she tried to make it work but couldn't live with your obsession with your company. The injustice of it burned. Julian had given Victoria everything she'd ever asked for. He'd arranged his schedule around her social events, bought her whatever she wanted, and never once questioned her frequent shopping trips and spa weekends. "She's rewriting history to save face," he said bitterly. "Of course she is," Megan agreed. "But people believe what they want to believe. The board is concerned about potential impact on the company's image. Tell them I'll be in tomorrow. Today I need to..." "What? Hide? Lick his wounds?" "Just tell them I'll handle it." After hanging up, Julian stood at his floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. His life had always been carefully planned and controlled. This deviation wasn't just painful, it was infuriating. His doorbell rang. Julian considered ignoring it, but then heard his mother's voice calling his name. He sighed and went to let her in. Caroline Davenport entered in a cloud of expensive perfume, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. At 68, she was still a formidable presence. She took one look at her son and pulled him into a hug. "My poor boy," she said, patting his cheek. "I came as soon as I saw the news." "I'm fine, Mom," Julian said automatically. Caroline arched an eyebrow. "No, you're not, but you will be." She made herself comfortable on his white leather sofa. "That girl never deserved you. I knew she was trouble from the start." "Not now, Mom," Julian warned. "Well, when would be a good time to discuss how she's dragging your name through the mud?" Caroline pulled out her iPad and showed him the Page 6 article. Victoria was portrayed as the brave woman who'd walked away from a controlling relationship, while Julian was painted as a workaholic who treated her like a trophy. "This is garbage," he said, tossing the iPad aside. "Of course it is. But you need to respond, darling. Your reputation..." "My reputation can take the hit," Julian interrupted. "Fighting with her publicly will only make it worse." Caroline looked like she wanted to argue, but instead said, "Well, at least come to dinner tonight. The Morgans are in town and Helen's daughter just got divorced. She's a lovely girl." "Mum," Julian cut her off, "I was left at the altar yesterday. I'm not interested in being set up today." Caroline sighed dramatically. "Fine, but you can't hide away forever. The best revenge is showing everyone that you're moving on." After his mother left, Julian tried to work from home but couldn't concentrate. Victoria's accusations kept replaying in his mind. Had he been emotionally unavailable, he'd thought? He was giving her what she wanted: financial security, social status, the life of luxury she seemed to crave. Around noon, his phone rang with an unknown number. Against his better judgment, he answered. "Mr. Davenport? This is Amara Johnson from yesterday." Julian straightened in his chair, surprised by how the sound of her voice affected him. "Amara, how did you get my number?" "Your friend, Robert, I think, came back for a jacket that was left behind. I hope you don't mind, but I asked him for your contact information. I wanted to check how you were doing." The simple kindness of her gesture touched him. "That's very thoughtful. I'm surviving." "Have you seen the news?" she asked hesitantly. "You mean the character assassination?" "Yes. I just wanted to say that anyone who spoke with you for even 5 minutes yesterday would know those things aren't true." Her voice was firm with conviction. Julian found himself smiling for the first time since the wedding disaster. "Thank you for that." "You're welcome." There was a pause. "Also, we found your grandfather's cufflinks. The ones you mentioned were important to you. I have them safe." Julian had completely forgotten about the platinum cufflinks his grandfather had left him. "I didn't realize I'd lost them. You must have taken them off when you loosened your tie. I can have them sent to your office if you'd like." "Actually," Julian said, surprising himself, "maybe I could pick them up in person to say thank you properly for your kindness yesterday." There was a pause and Julian wondered if he'd overstepped. "I'd be happy to meet you," Amara finally said. "I finish work at the event office at 6 today." They arranged to meet at a small coffee shop near the elite events office. After hanging up, Julian questioned his own impulse. Why had he suggested meeting her? He told himself it was just gratitude, nothing more. After all, she had been the one person who hadn't looked at him with pity or perverse curiosity yesterday. At 6:15, Julian walked into the coffee shop, having changed from his usual designer suit into more casual slacks and a sweater. He spotted Amara immediately. Out of her work uniform, dressed in simple jeans and a blue blouse, she looked younger and even more lovely than he remembered. She smiled as he approached, and for a moment, Julian forgot about Victoria, the humiliation, and all of it. There was something genuine about Amara Johnson that made everything else fade into the background. "I brought your cufflinks," she said, sliding a small box across the table. "Thank you." Julian sat down. "Though I have to admit they were just an excuse." Amara tilted her head. "An excuse?" "To see you again," Julian admitted. "You were the only person yesterday who made me feel like maybe my life wasn't completely over." Amara laughed softly. "Your life is definitely not over, though I imagine it doesn't feel that way right now." "No, it doesn't," Julian agreed. "Especially with Victoria's version of events making headlines." "Why don't you tell your side?" Amara asked. Julian sighed. "What would be the point? It would just extend the drama. Besides, I'm not even sure what happened. Everything seemed fine, until suddenly it wasn't." "Sometimes the warning signs are there, but we don't want to see them," Amara said gently. Julian studied her. "You sound like you're speaking from experience. Let's just say you're not the first person to be blindsided by someone they thought they knew." She took a sip of her coffee. "But enough about that. Tell me something good in your life." Julian found himself telling her about the education foundation he'd started 3 years ago, which provided scholarships to underprivileged students. Amara's eyes lit up as he described the program. "That's amazing," she said. "Those opportunities can change lives." "It's the most rewarding part of my work," Julian admitted, "though I haven't been as involved lately as I should be." "Well, now, you have one less distraction," Amara pointed out. Julian laughed. "That's one way to look at it." Their coffee stretched into dinner at the small Italian restaurant next door. Julian couldn't remember the last time he'd had such an easy conversation with someone. Amara was intelligent and thoughtful, and completely unimpressed by his wealth or status. When they finally parted ways, Julian found himself saying, "I'd like to see you again, Amara." She hesitated. "I'm not sure that's a good idea." "Why not?" "Because you're rebounding from a very public heartbreak, and I'm not in your world." Julian stepped closer. "Maybe I need someone who's not in my world. Someone real." Amara smiled but shook her head. "Give yourself some time to heal, Julian. My number's still in your phone if you want to talk as friends." As he watched her walk toward the subway station, Julian felt an unfamiliar determination. For the first time since Victoria had left him at the altar, he was thinking about something, someone else. And he wasn't ready to let that feeling go. Over the next 2 weeks, Julian threw himself back into work, but found excuses to text Amara nearly every day. Simple messages at first, thanking her again for returning the cufflinks, asking how her classes were going. She responded politely but maintained a friendly distance until one rainy Tuesday when he was leaving a board meeting and saw the headline on his phone, "Victoria Reynolds engaged to business rival Marcus Chen." The betrayal cut deep. Marcus Chen was the CEO of a tech company that had been trying to buy out a portion of Davenport Industries for years. Julian had met him at several industry events where Victoria had accompanied him. Now it all made sense. The times she'd claimed to be shopping or with friends, she'd been with Marcus. Without thinking, Julian called Amara. "Julian?" she answered, sounding surprised. "Is everything okay?" "Not really," he admitted. "Have you seen the news?" "About Victoria?" "Yes, I'm sorry. The worst part is I should have seen it coming. They've obviously been together for months." His voice was tight with anger and hurt. "Where are you right now?" Amara asked. "Just leaving my office." "There's a small park near your building, right? The one with the fountain. Meet me there in 20 minutes. Before Julian could ask why, she hung up. Exactly 20 minutes later, he spotted her rushing toward him under a large umbrella carrying a paper bag. "What's this about?" he asked as she reached him. Amara handed him the bag. "Comfort food. My grandmother always said, nothing heals a wounded heart like good food." Julian opened the bag to find still warm chocolate chip cookies from a bakery near her apartment in Queens. The simple thoughtfulness of the gesture touched him deeply. "You didn't have to come all this way," he said. "I know. But friends don't let friends face betrayal alone." She looked up at him, raindrops catching on her eyelashes. "And we are friends, right?" Julian felt something shift inside him as he looked at her, this woman who had rushed across the city in the rain to bring him cookies because she knew he was hurting. "Yes," he said softly. "We're friends." They found shelter under the park's gazebo and sat eating cookies while rain pattered on the roof. Julian told her everything, his history with Victoria, the wedding plans, and now the revelation of her affair with Marcus. "The most humiliating part is that everyone probably knew," Julian said bitterly. "I was the last to figure it out." "That's not on you," Amara said firmly. "That's on her for being dishonest." "I keep wondering what I did wrong," Julian admitted. "What I could have done differently." "Maybe nothing," Amara suggested. "Maybe she just wasn't the person you thought she was." They talked until the rain stopped and the sun began to set. Julian marveled at how easy it was to talk to Amara, how she listened without judgment and offered perspectives he hadn't considered. "Thank you," he said as they finally stood to leave, "for the cookies and the company." "Anytime," she replied with a smile. "That's what friends are for." "Let me drive you home," Julian offered. Amara shook her head. "I'm fine taking the subway." "It's getting late. Please let me make sure you get home safely." She finally agreed, and Julian's driver took them to her apartment building in Queens. It was a modest brick building, worlds away from his luxury penthouse. "Would you like to come up for coffee?" Amara offered, then quickly added, "As friends, of course." Julian smiled. "I'd like that." Her apartment was small but warm, filled with books and colorful throw pillows. Photos of her family adorned the walls, and a stack of textbooks on the dining table spoke of her teaching studies. "It's not much," she said, suddenly self-conscious as she saw her home through his eyes. "It's perfect," Julian said honestly. "It feels like a real home." As Amara made coffee, Julian wandered around her living room, examining the photos. One showed a younger Amara with an older woman who had the same warm smile. "My grandmother," Amara explained, noticing his interest. "She raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 8. "I'm sorry," Julian said. "She was amazing. Worked 2 jobs to put me through school. She passed away 5 years ago." Amara handed him a mug of coffee. "What about your family?" "Just my mother now. My father died when I was in college, heart attack." Julian sat on her sofa. "Mom's, well, she's a force of nature. Already trying to set me up with suitable replacements for Victoria." Amara laughed. "That didn't take long. She means well. She just wants me to be happy." "And what would make you happy, Julian?" Amara asked, sitting beside him. "Beyond business success, I mean." The question caught him off guard. No one had asked him that in a long time. "I don't know," he admitted. "I thought I had it all figured out. Career success, marriage to a beautiful woman, eventually children. The whole package. The dream on paper," Amara nodded. "Exactly. But now I'm not sure that's what I really want." He looked at her thoughtfully. "What about you? What makes you happy?" "Simple things," she said. "My students, family dinners with my sister and her kids, a good book on a rainy day." She smiled. "I've never needed much to be content." As they talked into the night, Julian felt a growing awareness of how different Amara was from anyone he'd dated before. There was no pretense with her, no agenda. She lived her life with purpose and kindness, finding joy in things his usual circle would consider ordinary. It was nearly midnight when Julian reluctantly said he should go. At the door, he turned to her. "I know you said we should just be friends," he began. Amara's expression grew cautious. "Julian, but I need to be honest," he continued. "I feel something when I'm with you, something real, and I think you feel it too." Amara looked down. "It's too soon, you're still healing." "Maybe," Julian acknowledged, "but I know what I feel." He gently lifted her chin so she was looking at him. "Just consider it. That's all I'm asking." Their eyes held for a long moment, and Julian thought he might kiss her, wanted to kiss her, but he stepped back. He wouldn't rush this. wouldn't risk scaring her away. "Good night, Amara," he said softly. "Good night, Julian." As his car drove him back to Manhattan, Julian realized he hadn't thought about Victoria or Marcus once in the last few hours. Instead, his mind was filled with Amara's smile, her laugh, and the way she saw the world and him with such clarity. For the first time since the wedding disaster, Julian felt something like hope. Maybe being left at the altar wasn't the end of his story. Maybe it was just the beginning of a new chapter, one he hadn't planned, but might turn out to be better than anything he could have imagined. The news of Victoria Reynolds' engagement to Marcus Chen dominated the business headlines for days. While Julian tried to focus on work, he couldn't escape the whispers and pitying glances from colleagues. The public humiliation stung, but what hurt most was the realization that his relationship with Victoria had been a lie. "Mr. Davenport, your mother is on line 1, his assistant Megan announced through the intercom. Again. Julian sighed and picked up the phone. "Mom, I told you I'm fine." "Well, you shouldn't be," Caroline Davenport declared. "That woman is parading around town with Marcus Chen like some sort of victory trophy. You need to respond, darling." "By doing what exactly?" Julian asked, rubbing his temples. "Dating someone new just to save face? That's not me." "The Wilsons' charity gala is this weekend," his mother pressed on. "Everyone who's anyone will be there, including Victoria and her new fiancé. You can't hide away forever." Julian was about to refuse when an idea struck him. "Actually, I will be attending." "Wonderful," Caroline exclaimed. "I'll call Isabella Wright. She's just back from Paris and would make a perfect—" "I already have a date, Mom," Julian interrupted. There was a pause. "You do? Who?" "You'll meet her at the gala," Julian said, not wanting to share Amara's name yet. His mother would undoubtedly research her background before they even met. After ending the call, Julian stared at his phone, wondering if he'd made a mistake. He and Amara had been texting regularly since that night at her apartment, but she'd been clear about wanting to be just friends. Would she even agree to attend the gala with him? Before he could overthink it, Julian dialed her number. "Julian?" Amara answered, sounding surprised. "Everything okay?" "I need a favor," he said directly. "A big one." Amara laughed softly. "That sounds ominous," Julian explained about the charity gala and Victoria's expected attendance with Marcus. "I know it's asking a lot, but would you consider being my +1? Just as friends," he added quickly. There was a long pause. "You want me to help you save face in front of your ex?" "That's not," Julian started, then sighed. "It sounds bad when you put it that way." "Because it is bad," Amara replied. "I don't want to be used as a prop in some revenge scenario, Julian." "You're right," he admitted, feeling ashamed. "I shouldn't have asked. Forget I mentioned it." "Hold on," Amara said before he could hang up. "I didn't say no. I just want to be clear about what this is. If I go with you, it's as your friend, not as some statement to make Victoria jealous." "Of course," Julian agreed quickly. "Just friends. And I don't have anything to wear to some fancy charity gala," she continued. "I can help with that," Julian offered, then quickly added, "but only if you're comfortable with it." Another pause. "Fine, but I picked the dress and I'm not pretending to be something I'm not." Julian smiled, relief washing over him. "I wouldn't want you to. Just be yourself. That's more than enough." The next day, Julian arranged for Amara to visit an exclusive boutique where celebrities and socialites shopped. He'd asked his assistant Megan to join her for moral support. Amara felt completely out of place among the designer gowns, with price tags that could pay several months of her rent. Megan, a no-nonsense woman in her 40s, seemed to sense her discomfort. "Don't worry about the prices," Megan told her. "Julian said to find whatever makes you feel comfortable." "Nothing here makes me feel comfortable," Amara admitted, eyeing a beaded gown that probably cost more than her yearly salary. Megan laughed. "Fair enough. But maybe we can find something that at least makes you look fabulous while feeling uncomfortable." After trying on several gowns that felt too revealing or too ornate, Amara finally found one she didn't hate. A simple emerald green dress with cap sleeves and a modest neckline. The color complemented her dark skin beautifully. "That's the one," Megan said approvingly. Classic and elegant, just like you. Amara blushed at the compliment. Thank you. I do like this one. Julian was right about you, Megan remarked, as they waited for the alterations consultant. What do you mean? You're not like the women he usually dates. Megan studied her with frank curiosity. I've worked for him for 8 years. Victoria was just the latest in a line of socialites and models who cared more about what Julian could give them than who he actually is. Amara shifted uncomfortably. Julian and I are just friends. Megan gave her a knowing look. If you say so. But for what it's worth, just friends isn't how he talks about you. Before Amara could ask what she meant, the consultant arrived to pin the dress for alterations. Later that night, as Amara was studying for her education theory class, her phone rang. It was her sister Lisa. Hey sis, Amara answered. What's up? What's up is that Tina from your work told me you're going to some fancy gala with a millionaire, Lisa said without preamble. When were you going to tell me? Amara groaned. It's not what you think. He's just a friend who needs moral support. A friend who's buying you designer dresses, Lisa pressed. How did you? Tina said you went to Elizabeth Rose Boutique today. Nobody shops there unless they're famous or dating someone famous. Amara sighed. Julian was left at the altar a few weeks ago. I was working the event and was kind to him. We became friends. His ex will be at this gala with her new fiancé and he doesn't want to go alone. End of story. Lisa said skeptically. And does this Julian look like the guys on your dating apps? Because those never work out. He's nothing like those guys, Amara admitted. He's successful, smart, surprisingly down-to-earth considering his wealth. And hot? Amara laughed despite herself. Yes, fine, he's very attractive, but seriously, it's not like that. We're from completely different worlds. Love crosses all boundaries, Lisa said dramatically. This isn't love, Amara insisted. It's friendship, and it's just one night. After hanging up, Amara tried to focus on her textbook, but her mind kept drifting to Julian. Despite her protestations to Lisa, she couldn't deny the flutter in her stomach whenever he called or texted. But getting involved with him would be a mistake. He was on the rebound, and once he recovered from his heartbreak, he'd go back to dating women from his own world. Beautiful, sophisticated women who knew which fork to use at fancy dinners. Amara couldn't compete with that, and she didn't want to try. Better to keep things friendly and protect her heart. And the night of the gala arrived, and Amara felt like an imposter as she looked at herself in the mirror. The emerald dress fit perfectly after alterations, and she'd styled her hair in an elegant updo, but no amount of fancy clothing could change who she was, a simple woman from Queens who worked event coordination while studying to become a teacher. Her doorbell rang at exactly 7 o'clock. Julian stood in the hallway looking devastatingly handsome in his tuxedo, his eyes widening appreciatively as he took in her appearance. You look beautiful, he said sincerely. Thank you, Amara replied, feeling her cheeks warm. You clean up pretty well yourself. In the car, Julian briefed her on what to expect. These events are mostly just wealthy people, congratulating themselves for donating money to worthy causes, he explained. The food is usually mediocre, the speech is boring, but the foundation does good work. What does it support? Amara asked. Arts. Education in underfunded schools. They provide instruments, art supplies, and instructors that these schools couldn't otherwise afford. Amara smiled. That's actually wonderful. Yeah, it is, Julian agreed. I've been on their board for 3 years. It's one of the few charities I'm involved with that feels like it makes a real difference. When they arrived at the hotel ballroom, Amara felt a wave of anxiety. The room was filled with New York's elite, women dripping in jewels and men in perfectly tailored tuxedos. Julian must have sensed her nervousness because he gently took her hand. Just stay close to me, you'll be fine. Almost immediately, they were approached by an elegant older woman with perfectly coiffed silver hair. Julian, darling, she said, air kissing his cheeks. I was beginning to think you weren't coming. Mom, Julian said, a warning note in his voice. I'd like you to meet Amara Johnson. Amara, this is my mother, Caroline Davenport. Caroline's smile remained fixed as her eyes swept over Amara, taking in every detail. "How lovely to meet you, my dear. How do you know my son?" "We met through her work in event coordination," Julian answered before Amara could speak. "How interesting," Caroline said, in a tone that suggested it was anything but. "Well, I must say hello to the Wilsons. Julian, don't forget to bid in the fine silent auction. The Hamptons vacation package would be perfect for you." As she walked away, Julian turned to Amara. "I'm sorry about that." "It's fine," Amara assured him, though Caroline's dismissive assessment had stung. "She wants what's best for you. I'm clearly not what she had in mind." "She doesn't know what's best for me," Julian said firmly. "Come on, let's get a drink, Azzy." They made their way to the bar. Amara noticed people watching them, whispering behind their hands. Julian seemed oblivious or perhaps just accustomed to the attention. They had just gotten their champagne when a strikingly beautiful woman in a red gown approached, a tall man in a grey tuxedo beside her. "Julian," the woman said with an artificial smile, "I'm so glad you could make it tonight." Amara knew immediately this was Victoria. In person, she was even more gorgeous than in the photos Amara had seen online. Flawless skin, perfectly styled blonde hair, and the confident posture of someone who had always been told she was special. "Victoria," Julian replied coolly. "Congratulations on your engagement, though I must say the timing was interesting." Victoria's smile tightened. "Yes, well, when you know, you know." She turned to Amara. "And you are?" "Amara Johnson," she answered, extending her hand. "It's nice to meet you." Victoria shook her hand briefly. "How do you two know each other?" "We met recently," Julian said vaguely. Victoria hummed, her eyes skeptical. "Well, Marcus and I must make the rounds. Enjoy your evening." As they walked away, Amara heard Victoria say loudly to Marcus, "Poor Julian, already rebounding with the help." Julian's jaw clenched. "I'm sorry you had to hear that." "I've been called worse," Amara said, trying to make light of it. "Though I have to admit, she's exactly as unpleasant as I imagined." Julian laughed, his tension easing. "You have no idea. That was actually her being polite." Throughout dinner, Julian introduced Amara to various friends and business associates. Some were genuinely friendly, while others barely concealed their curiosity about who she was and why Julian had brought her. During a lull in the conversation, Amara excused herself to find the restroom. As she was washing her hands, Victoria entered with two other women. "Oh," Victoria said, pretending surprise. "Amara, was it? I hope you're enjoying yourself. These events can be so intimidating when you're not used to them." The condescension in her voice was unmistakable. The other women smirked. "Actually, I coordinate events like this for a living," Amara replied evenly, "though I'm usually working behind the scenes." "How charming," Victoria said. "And now Julian has brought you into the spotlight. You must be thrilled." "Julian is a friend who needed company tonight," Amara said firmly. "That's all." Victoria laughed, the sound like glass breaking. "Oh, honey. Men like Julian don't have female friends. You're a distraction, a way to save face after I left him." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Enjoy it while it lasts, but don't fool yourself into thinking it's more than that." Amara refused to be intimidated. "You know, for someone who's supposedly moved on to bigger and better things, you seem awfully concerned with what Julian is doing." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Just offering friendly advice. These people," she gestured vaguely toward the ballroom, "they'll never accept you. You're not one of us." "Maybe that's a good thing," Amara replied, meeting Victoria's gaze steadily. After Victoria and her friends left, Amara took a moment to compose herself. Victoria's words had hit a nerve. They echoed her own doubts about whatever was developing between her and Julian. When she returned to the table, Julian immediately sensed something was wrong. "What happened?" he asked. "Nothing," Amara said, forcing a smile. "Just a friendly chat with your ex." Julian frowned. "What did she say to you?" "Nothing I didn't already know," Amara replied. "That I don't belong here, that this isn't my world." "Amara, it's fine, Julian," she cut him off. "She's right. I don't belong here. But that doesn't mean I can't hold my own for one night." Julian. Looked like he wanted to say more, but the speeches were beginning. Throughout the rest of the evening, he stayed close to Amara, his hand occasionally touching her back or arm in a gesture that felt both protective and possessive. When they finally left, Amara felt exhausted from the constant scrutiny and the effort of appearing unfazed by it all. "Thank you for coming with me tonight," Julian said as they drove back to her apartment. "I know it wasn't easy." "It was an experience," Amara replied diplomatically. "Victoria was wrong," Julian said suddenly. "About you not belonging. You outshone everyone in that room tonight." Amara gave him a skeptical look. "Now you're just being nice." "I'm being honest," Julian insisted. "You were genuine in a room full of fake people. Do you know how rare that is in my world?" They fell silent for the rest of the drive. When they reached her building, Julian walked her to her door. "I'd invite you in, but I have an early class tomorrow," Amara said. "Of course," Julian nodded. He seemed hesitant, then said, "Amara, about what Victoria said." "It's fine, Julian," she interrupted. "I know where I stand, we're friends, and I'm happy with that." Julian studied her face. "What if I'm not?" Amara's heart skipped. "What do you mean?" Julian stepped closer. "What if I want more than friendship?" Before Amara could respond, Julian leaned down and kissed her. The kiss was gentle at first, questioning, but when she didn't pull away, it deepened with an intensity that took her breath away. When they finally broke apart, Amara felt dizzy with emotion. "Julian," she whispered, "this is complicated." "I know," he acknowledged, "and I know the timing isn't ideal. But what I feel for you is real, Amara. More real than anything I had with Victoria." Amara took a step back, needing space to think. "Clearly, this is all happening so fast. A month ago you were about to marry someone else, and it would have been the biggest mistake of my life," Julian said earnestly. "Meeting you, it made me realize what was missing. With Victoria, everything was a performance. With you, I can just be myself." Amara wanted to believe him, but doubt nagged at her. "How do you know this isn't just a reaction to Victoria's betrayal? That I'm not just the opposite of what hurt you?" Julian's expression softened. "Because when I'm with you, I don't think about Victoria at all. I just think about you, how your eyes crinkle when you laugh, how passionate you are about teaching, how you make me feel like a better person just by being around you." His words melted her resistance. "I feel something for you too," she admitted, "but I'm scared, Julian. Your world and mine are so different." "Then let me into your world," Julian suggested, "and I'll show you that the differences don't matter." He kissed her again, and Amara let herself believe just for a moment that it could be that simple. The next morning, Amara woke to a text from Julian. "Dinner tonight? Your choice of restaurant." She smiled, remembering their kisses from the night before. Despite her reservations, she couldn't deny the connection between them. "Okay," she replied, "but nothing fancy. I'm thinking pizza." Julian's response came quickly. "Perfect. I'll pick you up at 7. As Amara got ready for her morning class, her phone buzzed with a text from her sister Lisa. "Check page 6. With a sense of dread, Amara opened the website to find a photo of her and Julian from the gala, his hand on the small of her back as they entered the ballroom. The headline read, "Davenport's Downgrade. Billionaire Rebounds with Event Staff." The article was brutal, describing Amara as Julian's working-class rebound and speculating that she was using him for his money. There were quotes from sources close to Julian, claiming he was just trying to make Victoria jealous. Amara felt sick. This was exactly what she'd feared, being dragged into the spotlight, her character assassinated by people who didn't even know her. Her phone rang. "Julian, have you seen it?" he asked without preamble. "Yes," she said quietly. "I'm so sorry, Amara, this is my fault. I should have warned you something like this might happen." "It's fine," she said automatically, though it wasn't. "I knew what I was getting into." "No, it's not fine," Julian said firmly. "I'll have my lawyer contact them for a retraction. This is defamation." "Julian, stop," Amara sighed. "That will only make it worse. It's just a gossip column. No one takes it seriously." But they both knew that wasn't true. In Julian's world, perception was reality, and page 6 had just painted her as a gold digger. Let me come over, Julian insisted. We can talk about this in person. I have classes all day, Amara reminded him. And honestly, I need some time to think. There was a pause. You're reconsidering us, aren't you? I'm reconsidering whether I can handle this kind of scrutiny, Amara admitted. This is your normal, Julian. It's not mine. Amara, please, Julian's voice was urgent. Don't let them win. This is exactly what Victoria wants, to drive a wedge between us. This isn't about Victoria, Amara said, though she suspected Victoria might have been the source quoted in the article. It's about me and what I can handle. I need some space today, okay? Julian reluctantly agreed, and Amara headed to her class, trying to focus on teaching methods instead of the embarrassing article. But when she arrived at the community college, she could feel eyes on her. Several students were whispering and looking at their phones. Ms. Johnson, one of her classmates, approached. Are you really dating Julian Davenport? Amara groaned inwardly. The story had spread further than she'd expected. Throughout the day, more people recognized her from the article. By afternoon, she'd received calls from high school friends she hadn't spoken to in years, all curious about her billionaire boyfriend. Even her professor mentioned it. Quite a life change you're experiencing, Miss Johnson, he remarked as she was leaving class. I hope it won't affect your studies. By evening, Amara felt drained. She was seriously considering cancelling dinner with Julian when there was a knock at her door. She opened it to find him standing there, holding a pizza box. I know you said you needed space, he said apologetically, but I thought you might be hungry after a long day. The simple gesture touched her. Julian wasn't trying to buy her forgiveness with expensive gifts. He'd brought her pizza, as she'd requested. Come in, she said, stepping aside. They sat at her small kitchen table, eating pizza straight from the box. Julian watched her carefully. How bad was your day? Pretty bad, Amara admitted. I didn't realize how quickly these things spread. I'm sorry, Julian said, reaching for her hand. The attention will die down soon. These stories always do. Until the next one, Amara pointed out. Julian, this is your life, constant scrutiny. People making up stories about you. I don't know if I can live like that. It doesn't have to be that way, Julian insisted. We can be more careful, keep things private. How? You're a public figure. People are interested in who you date, especially after the Victoria fiasco. Julian flinched at the mention of his failed wedding, but pressed on. What are you saying, that we shouldn't even try because it might be difficult? I'm saying we need to be realistic, Amara replied gently. You're on the rebound, Julian, and I'm convenient. The opposite of Victoria in every way. That's not fair, Julian's voice hardened. Don't tell me how I feel. Yes, you're different from Victoria, but that's not why I'm drawn to you. I care about you, Amara. The real you, not as some antidote to my ex. Amara wanted to believe him, but doubt clouded her thoughts. Even if that's true now, what about in a few months? When you're over the hurt and ready to rejoin your world, the novelty of dating someone like me will wear off. Julian stood up, frustration evident in his stance. Someone like you mean someone kind, intelligent, and genuine? You're right. Those qualities are rare in my world. That's why I don't want to let you go. His passion was compelling, and Amara felt her resolve weakening. I'm scared, she admitted. Not just of the public attention, but of getting hurt. You have so much power in this dynamic, Julian. Your world, your rules. Julian knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. Then we make new rules together. I don't care what anyone thinks, not Victoria, not the gossip columns, not even my mother. I just care about what you think, what you feel. Looking into his earnest eyes, Amara wanted to believe it could be that simple. Okay, she said finally, we'll try, but slowly, and I won't change who I am to fit into your world. I would never ask you to, Julian promised. It's who you are that makes you special. He leaned in to kiss her, and Amara let herself hope that, maybe against all odds, they could find a way to make this work. Over the next few weeks, Julian kept his promise to take things slowly. Instead of lavish restaurants and high-profile events, they spent time in Amara's neighborhood, trying local diners, walking in the park, watching movies on her small television. Julian seemed genuinely happy with the simplicity of their outings, often remarking how refreshing it was to be somewhere people didn't recognize him or want something from him. One Sunday, Amara invited Julian to her sister Lisa's house for a family dinner. She was nervous about introducing him to her family, worried they might treat him differently because of his wealth. "Just be yourself," she advised as they approached Lisa's modest house in Queens. "And maybe don't mention that your watch costs more than their mortgage." Julian laughed. "I'll try to restrain myself." Lisa opened the door, her eyes widening slightly at the sight of Julian in person. "So you do exist," she teased. "I was starting to think Amara made you up." "Very funny," Amara rolled her eyes. "Julian, this is my sister Lisa. Lisa, be nice." "I'm always nice," Lisa protested, ushering them inside. "Kids, Aunt Amara is here with her friend." Amara's niece Zoe, 8, and nephew Marcus, 10, came running. They stopped short at the sight of Julian. "Are you really a billionaire?" Marcus asked bluntly. "Marcus," Lisa scolded. Julian smiled. "I do okay," he answered simply. "But I hear you're pretty good at basketball. That's much more impressive." Marcus looked skeptical but was quickly won over when Julian offered to shoot some hoops in the driveway before dinner. "Is he for real?" Lisa whispered to Amara as they watched Julian patiently teaching Marcus a new dribbling technique. Surprisingly, "Yes," Amara replied. "He's different from what I expected." "Different how?" Amara considered the question. "He's more normal, grounded. Despite everything, he's just a guy who got his heart broken and is trying to figure things out." "A guy worth billions," Lisa pointed. "Out. The money complicates things," Amara admitted. "But when we're together, it doesn't seem to matter." Lisa studied her sister's face. "You're falling for him, aren't you?" Amara didn't answer, but her expression said enough. The dinner was chaotic and warm, so different from the formal meals Julian was used to. Lisa's husband Mike asked Julian about business but didn't fawn over him. The kids interrupted constantly with stories about school and friends. It was loud and messy and perfect. As they drove back to Amara's apartment that night, Julian seemed thoughtful. "Your family is wonderful," he said finally. "They love each other so much, it's obvious in everything they do." "They can be a lot," Amara laughed. "But yes, we're close. My family dinners were never like that," Julian admitted. "Even before my father died, meals were formal affairs, more like business meetings than family time." Amara reached over to take his hand. "Well, you're welcome at Lisa's any time. The kids already adore you." "I'd like that," Julian said, squeezing her hand. "Being part of a real family dinner." When they reached her apartment, Julian walked her to the door as usual. Their goodnight kisses had become a treasured ritual, growing more passionate each time. Tonight, Amara didn't want him to leave. "Would you like to come in?" she asked. Softly, Julian searched her face. "Are you sure?" Amara nodded, and as she led him into her apartment and closed the door behind them, she felt certain that whatever happened next, her life would never be the same. Later, as they lay tangled in her sheets, Julian traced patterns on her bare shoulder. "I think I'm falling in love with you," he whispered. Amara's heart swelled with emotion. She'd been fighting her feelings, afraid of being hurt, but in that moment she couldn't deny the truth. "I think I'm falling in love with you too." Julian pulled her closer. "When I was left at the altar, I thought my life was over. Now I think it was the best thing that ever happened to me. It led me to you." Amara smiled against his chest. "Maybe some things really are meant to be." As she drifted off to sleep in Julian's arms, Amara allowed herself to believe that perhaps their different worlds didn't matter. Perhaps all that mattered was how they felt when they were together. But across town, Victoria Reynolds was scrolling through photos of Julian and Amara on her phone, a calculating expression on her face. "Enjoy it while it lasts," she murmured, picking up her phone to make a call. "Marcus, I need a favor." The new day would bring new challenges for Julian and Amara's fledgling relationship, challenges neither of them could anticipate as they slept peacefully in each other's arms, blissfully unaware of the storm gathering on the horizon. The morning sunlight filtered through Amara's curtains as she slowly woke up, feeling Julian's arm still wrapped around her waist. For a moment she just watched him sleep, still hardly believing that this powerful, complicated man had found his way into her life and her heart. As if sensing her gaze, Julian opened his eyes. "Good morning," he murmured, pulling her closer. "Good morning," she replied with a smile. "Sleep well." "Better than I have in years," he admitted, kissing her forehead. "Though your mattress has seen better days," Amara laughed. "Not all of us sleep on custom-made mattresses that cost more than a car." "I should buy you a new one," Julian offered. "No," Amara said firmly. "We talked about this. No expensive gifts." Julian sighed but nodded. Their different financial situations had been a point of contention. Julian wanted to shower Amara with gifts, while she was determined to maintain her independence. "What time is your class today?" Julian asked, changing the subject. 9. "Which means I need to get moving." Amara reluctantly pulled away from his embrace. As she showered, Amara thought about how quickly things had changed. 2 months ago, she'd been single and focused solely on finishing her teaching degree. Now she was in a relationship with one of New York's most eligible bachelors, a man who had been ready to marry someone else the day they met. Sometimes it still felt surreal, like she was living someone else's life. But then Julian would look at her with such warmth and sincerity that her doubts would fade. He made her feel special, valued for who she was rather than what she looked like or what she could offer him. When she emerged from the bathroom, she found Julian in her tiny kitchen, attempting to make coffee with her ancient coffee maker. "You need to press the button twice and then jiggle the cord," she instructed, amused by his confusion. "This thing belongs in a museum," Julian commented, following her instructions. "It works fine," Amara defended. "Not everything needs to be top of the line to be good enough." Julian caught the double meaning in her words. "Is that how you see yourself, as not top of the line?" Amara shrugged. "I'm just being realistic. I'm not from your world, Julian." "Maybe that's exactly why you're perfect for me," he said, pulling her into his arms. "I've had enough of my world to last a lifetime." After a quick breakfast, Julian reluctantly said he needed to go home to change before his meetings. At the door, he kissed her thoroughly, leaving her breathless. "Dinner tonight?" he asked. "I was thinking we could try that Thai place you mentioned." "Sounds perfect," Amara agreed, her heart still racing from his kiss. As Julian's town car pulled away, Amara noticed a photographer across the street quickly snapping photos. Despite their efforts to keep their relationship private, the media's interest hadn't completely died down. Every few days, a new article would appear speculating about Julian's unlikely romance with his working-class girlfriend. Amara tried not to let it bother her, but the constant scrutiny was wearing. Still, Julian was worth it. She gathered her books and headed to class, determinedly pushing the negative thoughts aside. At Davenport Industries, Julian was in the middle of a board meeting when his assistant Megan slipped him a note. "Marcus Chen, online 2, says it's urgent." Julian frowned. Why would Victoria's fiancé be calling him? He excused himself and took the call in his private office. "Chen," Julian said coldly. "What can I do for you?" "Davenport," Marcus replied, his tone equally frigid. "We need to talk." "It's about the Suntech acquisition." Julian tensed. Suntech was a promising renewable energy company that Davenport Industries had been quietly courting for months. The acquisition would give them a significant advantage in the green energy market. "What about it?" Julian asked cautiously. "I know you've been in talks with them," Marcus said, "but they'll be signing with Chen Global by the end of the week." Julian gripped the phone tighter. "That's impossible. We're in the final stages of negotiations." "Check with your team," Marcus suggested smugly. "Things change quickly in business." As soon as they hung up, Julian called his head of acquisitions, who confirmed the bad news. Suntech had suddenly backed out, citing concerns about Davenport Industries' commitment to renewable energy. "This doesn't make sense," Julian said, pacing his office. "We've been transparent about our green initiatives. Chen Global doesn't even have a significant presence in that sector." "There's more," his executive added reluctantly. "They specifically mentioned concerns about leadership stability." Julian stopped pacing. "Meaning what exactly?" meaning the tabloid stories about your personal life. They didn't say it directly, but the implication was clear. They're worried your judgment might be compromised. Julian felt cold anger building inside him. This had Victoria written all over it. She knew how important the Suntech deal was. He'd discussed it with her before their wedding was called off. Now she and Marcus were using his relationship with Amara against him professionally. Set up a meeting with Suntech, Julian instructed. I want to address their concerns personally. After hanging up, Julian sat at his desk, troubled by this new development. He'd known dating Amara might raise eyebrows socially, but he hadn't anticipated it affecting his business. The thought that his personal choices could undermine everything he'd worked for was unsettling. His phone buzzed with a text from Amara. Looking forward to dinner tonight. Miss you already. Julian smiled despite his worries. Whatever complications Amara brought to his life, she also brought joy and authenticity. He wouldn't let Victoria and Marcus's schemes come between them. That evening, Julian picked Amara up as planned, but she immediately sensed something was wrong. Bad day, she asked, as they sat in the small, family-owned Thai restaurant. Julian hesitated, not wanting to burden her with his problems. Just some business complications. Tell me, Amara insisted gently. That's what partners do. They share their troubles. So Julian explained about Suntech and Marcus Chen's call. It's not just about losing the deal, he concluded. It's the implication that my personal life is affecting my professional judgment. Amara's expression fell. You mean your relationship with me? Julian reached across the table to take her hand. This isn't your fault, Amara. It's Victoria and Marcus trying to hurt me through you. But it's working, Amara pointed out. Your business is suffering because of me. No, Julian said firmly. It's suffering because of petty, vindictive people using underhanded tactics. Don't let them get in your head. Amara nodded, but Julian could see the worry in her eyes. She understood better than he realized how their different worlds could complicate things. After dinner, they decided to walk back to Amara's apartment, enjoying the warm spring evening. They were so engrossed in conversation that they didn't notice the paparazzi until camera flashes startled them. Julian, is it true Suntech rejected Davenport Industries because of your relationship? Amara, how does it feel to cost your boyfriend millions? Julian instinctively pulled Amara close, shielding her from the cameras. No comment, he said firmly, guiding her quickly down the street. More photographers appeared surrounding them. Amara felt panic rising as they called out increasingly personal and insulting questions. Is this a publicity stunt to distract from the failed wedding? Amara, did Julian upgrade your apartment yet? Julian flagged down a taxi, practically pushing Amara inside before climbing in after her. Go, he instructed the driver, who pulled away from the curb as photographers continued snapping pictures. In the back seat, Amara trembled slightly. Does this happen often? Not usually this aggressively, Julian admitted. Someone must have tipped them off about where we'd be. Victoria? Amara suggested. Julian's expression hardened. Probably. This has her fingerprints all over it. By the time they reached Amara's apartment, she had composed herself, but Julian could tell she was shaken. Inside, she paced her small living room. Maybe we should cool things down for a while, she suggested quietly. Julian felt his heart drop. What do you mean? Just until the media frenzy dies down. Until you secure your business deal. Amara couldn't meet his eyes. I don't want to be the reason your company suffers. No, Julian said firmly, taking her shoulders gently. That's exactly what they want. If we pull apart now, Victoria and Marcus win. This isn't a game, Julian, Amara argued. This is your life's work. And you're becoming an important part of my life, Julian countered. I won't choose between you and my company. I won't have to. Amara finally looked at him, her eyes troubled. How can you be so sure? Because I'll fix this, Julian promised. Trust me, Amara. Trust what we're building together. After a moment, Amara nodded, letting Julian pull her into his embrace. But as she rested her head against his chest, doubt continued to gnaw at her. She loved Julian, but she was beginning to wonder if love was enough to bridge their vastly different worlds. The next morning, Amara's fears were confirmed when she opened her laptop to find their photos splashed across every gossip site. So the headlines were brutal. Davenport's disaster, billionaire's romance costs company millions. Gold digger strikes again. How Amara Johnson brought down Manhattan's most eligible bachelor. Worst of all was a quote from an anonymous source close to the couple, claiming Amara had strategically positioned herself at Julian's failed wedding, planning to catch him at his most vulnerable. Amara felt physically ill reading the lies. Her phone had been buzzing non-stop with texts from friends and colleagues asking about the stories. Even her professor had emailed, asking if she needed time off to deal with her personal situation. With shaking hands, she called. "Julian, have you seen it?" she asked when he answered. "I'm looking at it now," Julian replied, his voice tight with anger. "My lawyers are already working on cease and desist letters. Letters won't help," Amara said despairingly. "The damage is done." "Amara, listen to me," Julian said firmly. "This will pass. These stories always do. Something new will capture their attention next week. And what happens until then? My reputation is being destroyed. My students' parents are probably reading this garbage, thinking their children are being taught by some kind of opportunistic gold digger. You know that's not true," Julian reminded her, "and so do the people who matter." "Do they?" Amara challenged. "Your mother believes it. Your business associates believe it. Even my co-workers are starting to look at me differently." Julian was silent for a moment. "What are you saying, Amara?" She took a deep breath. "I'm saying, this is getting too complicated. Maybe we moved too fast. Maybe we need to step back and reevaluate." "If you want to break up," Julian's voice was incredulous. "No," Amara said quickly. "At least I don't think so. I just need some space to think clearly. This is all so overwhelming." Julian sighed heavily. "Is there anything I can say to change your mind?" "It's not about changing my mind," Amara explained. "It's about taking time to be sure that what we're feeling is real and not just caught up in the drama of it all." After a long pause, Julian reluctantly agreed. "Take whatever time you need. Just promise you won't shut me out completely." "I promise," Amara said softly. "I just need a few days." After they hung up, Amara sat on her couch, tears streaming down her face. She loved Julian, that much she knew for certain. But loving him meant being dragged into a world she'd never asked for, where her privacy was violated and her character assassinated for entertainment. Was any relationship worth that kind of sacrifice? Joyce Julian threw himself into work after his conversation with Amara, determined to fix at least one part of the mess. He secured a meeting with Suntech's CEO, Martin Wells, for that afternoon. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice," Julian said as they sat in Martin's office. "I respect you enough to hear you out," Martin replied. "But our decision is pretty much final, Julian. Before you completely close the door, I'd like to understand your concerns more specifically," Julian said. "Is it really about Davenport Industries' commitment to green energy, or is it something else?" Martin hesitated. "Off the record, the board is concerned about stability. Your personal life has been very public lately, and that affects my company's ability to deliver on our promises." "How exactly?" Julian pressed. "It doesn't," Martin admitted, "but perception matters in this business. Chen Global made a compelling case that your focus might be divided." Julian leaned forward. "Martin, you've known me for years. Have I ever let personal matters affect my business judgment?" "No," Martin conceded. "But, no buts," Julian interrupted. "This is Marcus Chen using underhanded tactics because he can't compete fairly. You're too smart to fall for it." Martin seemed conflicted. "We've already entered preliminary discussions with Chen Global." "But no contracts have been signed," Julian pointed out. "I'm prepared to improve our offer by 15%, with guarantees on development timelines that I know Chen can't match." By the end of the meeting, Martin had agreed to take Julian's revised proposal back to his board. It wasn't a victory yet, but it was a step in the right direction. As Julian left the Suntech offices, his phone rang. It was his mother. "Julian, darling, we need to talk. Dinner tonight at the house, 7 o'clock. Her tone made it clear this wasn't a request. Julian sighed. "Is this about Amara? Because I'm really not in the mood for another lecture, Mom." It's about protecting what your father and I built, Caroline replied crisply. 7 o'clock, don't be late. Julian arrived at his childhood home, a stately mansion on the Upper East Side, precisely at 7. The house always felt too large and formal to him, especially since his father's death. His mother had preserved it like a museum to their family's success. Caroline Davenport greeted him with air kisses to both cheeks, then led him to the formal dining room where the housekeeper had set 2 places with the family's fine china. "I've asked Mrs. Reynolds to prepare your favorite," Caroline said as they sat down. "Filet mignon with truffle butter." Julian recognized his mother's strategy: soften him up before delivering the blow. "Let's skip the pleasantries, Mom. What's this about?" Caroline's expression hardened slightly. "The board called me today. They're concerned about the direction of the company under your leadership." Julian stared at her in disbelief. "The board called you? You haven't been involved in day-to-day operations for years." "I still hold significant shares," Caroline reminded him, "and several board members remain loyal to me and to your father's vision." Which was what? To prioritize money over happiness? To marry for social standing rather than love? Julian's voice was bitter. "Your father built Davenport Industries from nothing," Caroline said sharply. "Everything we have, everything you have, is because of his dedication to the company above all else." "And he died of a heart attack at 58, Julian pointed out. "Alone in his office on a Sunday. Is that what you want from me?" Caroline softened slightly. "Of course not, darling. I want you to be happy. But this girl—" "Amara," Julian supplied firmly. "Her name is Amara." "Fine. Amara, she might be a lovely person, but she's causing damage to the company. The SunTech deal is just the beginning. The board is discussing whether your judgment has been compromised." Julian felt cold anger building. "My judgment is perfectly sound. Better than it's been in years, actually. For once, I'm making decisions based on what I want, not what looks good on paper." Caroline studied him for a moment. "You really care about her, don't you?" "I love her," Julian said simply. His mother looked genuinely surprised. "After only a few months? Julian, be reasonable. You barely know this woman." "I know enough," Julian insisted. "I know she sees me. The real me, not my bank account or my social position. Do you know how rare that is in our world?" Caroline sighed. "Love isn't always enough, Julian, especially when the gap between your lives is so vast." "The gap is only a problem because people like you make it one," Julian argued. "It's not just me," Caroline countered. "It's reality. Your world and hers don't easily mix. Sooner or later, one of you will have to change to accommodate the other. Are you ready for that sacrifice? Is she?" Julian didn't answer immediately. His mother had articulated the very concerns that had been nagging at him, the same ones that had prompted Amara to ask for space. Caroline pressed her advantage. "All I'm asking is that you consider the consequences of this relationship, not just for the company, but for your future happiness, and hers." Julian pushed away from the table. "I should go." "You haven't touched your dinner," Caroline protested. "I've lost my appetite," Julian replied, heading for the door. "Julian," his mother called after him, "whatever you decide, I am on your side. I just want what's best for you." Julian turned back. "Then trust me to know what that is." As he drove home, Julian found himself thinking about Amara. Her smile, her kindness, the way she challenged him to be better. He'd known her for only a short time, but the connection between them felt more real than anything he'd experienced before. Yet doubts crept in. Was his mother right? Were their differences too fundamental to overcome? And even if they could, would Amara want to? She'd already expressed reservations about the public scrutiny and its effect on her life. When he reached his penthouse, Julian poured himself a scotch and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Somewhere out there, Amara was also contemplating their future. The thought that she might decide they had no future together filled him with a sense of loss he hadn't expected. His phone buzzed with a text. Robert, his best friend. "Saw the news. You okay? Want to grab a drink?" Julian started to type a refusal, then changed his mind. He needed perspective from someone who knew him well. "Meet you at Morgan's in 30. Morgan's was an upscale bar where the city's elite could drink without fear of paparazzi or interruption. Robert was already seated in a private booth when Julian arrived. "You look like hell," Robert observed as Julian slid into the seat across from him. "Thanks for the support," Julian replied dryly, signaling for another scotch. "That's what I'm here for," Robert said with a grin that faded quickly. "Seriously though, are you okay? These stories about you and Amara are brutal." Julian sighed. "The stories I can handle. It's Amara pulling away that's killing me." "She broke up with you?" Robert asked, surprised. "Not exactly. She asked for space to think." Julian stared into his drink. "The media attention is taking a toll on her. On us." Robert nodded sympathetically. "It can't be easy for someone who's not used to it." "That's just it," Julian said. "Should I be asking her to get used to it? To completely change her life for me? I don't know if that's fair." "Fair has nothing to do with it," Robert pointed out. "Relationships are about compromise. The question is whether what you have is worth fighting for." Julian didn't hesitate. "It is. She is." "Then what's the problem?" Julian leaned back, considering. "My mother thinks the gap between our worlds is too wide to bridge. That eventually, one of us will have to sacrifice too much." Robert laughed. "No offense, but your mother isn't exactly an expert on modern relationships. She married your father in what was basically a business merger of two wealthy families." "That's harsh," Julian said, though he knew there was truth to it. "But accurate," Robert insisted. "Look, I've seen you with Amara. You light up around her in a way you never did with Victoria. That has to count for something." "It counts for everything," Julian agreed. "But is it enough?" "Only you and Amara can answer that," Robert said. "But, for what it's worth, I think you'd be a fool to let her go without a fight." Julian nodded slowly. "I need to see her, to make her understand that none of this matters compared to how I feel about her." "That's the spirit," Robert encouraged. "Though, maybe sober up first. Declarations of love are better without Scotch breath." Julian laughed, feeling more hopeful than he had all day. He'd give Amara the space she'd asked for, but only for tonight. Tomorrow he would fight for their relationship with everything he had. Amara was grading papers in her apartment when her doorbell rang. She wasn't expecting anyone, and Julian had promised to give her space. Cautiously, she checked the peephole, surprised to see Victoria Reynolds standing in her hallway. Amara hesitated, then curiosity won out. She opened the door. "Victoria, this is unexpected." Victoria looked as perfect as always in an expensive designer outfit, her blonde hair styled impeccably. "May I come in? I think we should talk." Against her better judgment, Amara stepped aside. Victoria entered, her eyes taking in the modest apartment with barely concealed disdain. "What do you want?" Amara asked directly. "To offer you a deal," Victoria replied, opening her purse and removing a checkbook. "How much would it take for you to leave Julian alone? 1 million? 2? Amara stared at her in shock. "You can't be serious." "I'm entirely serious," Victoria said coolly. "Julian is making a mistake that's costing him professionally. I'm offering you a chance to walk away with your future secured." "I'm not interested in your money," Amara said angrily, "and I'm certainly not discussing my relationship with you." Victoria smiled thinly. "Your relationship? Is that what you call it?" "Let me be clear, Amara. You are a phase. Julian's rebellion against everything he's worked for. Eventually, he'll remember who he really is, and when that happens, you'll be discarded." The words stung because they echoed Amara's own fears. "I think you should leave." "Not until you hear me out," Victoria insisted. "I know Julian better than you ever will. We move in the same circles, understand the same pressures. You don't belong in his world, and deep down, you know it." "This isn't about belonging in his world," Amara countered. "It's about Julian and me caring about each other." Victoria laughed, the sound cutting. "Caring, please. Julian Davenport was raised to prioritize success and status. His current infatuation with you is just a reaction to being left at the altar. Once his ego recovers, he'll want what he's always wanted, someone who fits into his life seamlessly." Amara tried to maintain her composure, but Victoria's confidence was unsettling. "If you know him so well, why did you leave him at the altar?" A flash of something Regret, perhaps, crossed Victoria's face before she composed herself. That was a miscalculation, one I'm now trying to rectify. By offering me money to disappear. Amara shook her head in disbelief. Does Marcus know you're here? Marcus understands what needs to be done, Victoria said dismissively. This isn't personal, Amara, it's business. Julian's relationship with you is destabilizing Davenport Industries at a critical time. The board is already discussing whether he should be replaced as CEO. Amara felt a chill. That can't be true. Call Caroline Davenport and ask her yourself, Victoria suggested. Even she understands the damage you're causing to the family legacy. Amara sat down heavily on her sofa. Why are you doing this? You left Julian. You're engaged to someone else. Victoria's expression hardened. Because Julian Davenport is meant for greater things than hiding away in Queens with a schoolteacher. His father built an empire that Julian is now jeopardizing because of you. She wrote out a check and placed it on Amara's coffee table. Think about it. This amount could pay off your student loans, buy you a real home, give you the freedom to focus on your teaching career without financial stress. Amara stared at the check, more money than she'd ever seen in her life. Get out, Victoria shrugged, heading for the door. The offer stands for 48 hours. After that, things will get much more difficult for both you and Julian. After Victoria left, Amara picked up the check, her hands trembling with anger and uncertainty. $2 million. A life-changing amount. She tore it into pieces and threw it in the trash. But Victoria's words continued to echo in her mind. Was she really damaging Julian's company, his reputation, his future? The thought was unbearable. Amara loved Julian too much to be the cause of his downfall. But what if staying with him meant exactly that? With tears streaming down her face, Amara made the hardest decision of her life. She picked up her phone and dialed Julian's number, praying she was doing the right thing. "Julian," she said. "When?" he answered. "We need to talk, not in a few days. Now." The urgency in her voice must have alarmed him. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, he promised. Amara hung up and wiped her tears, preparing herself for what she had to do. Sometimes, she thought sadly, loving someone meant letting them go even when it broke your heart to do it. But as she waited for Julian to arrive, a small voice inside her whispered that perhaps there was another way, that perhaps, against all odds, true love really could conquer all. Julian arrived at Amara's apartment in record time, his heart pounding with anxiety. The urgency in her voice had frightened him. It sounded like goodbye, and he wasn't ready for that. Not when he just realized how much she meant to him. When Amara opened the door, her red-rimmed eyes confirmed his fears. She'd been crying. "What happened?" he asked, stepping inside and taking her hands in his. "Talk to me, Amara." She pulled away, needing distance to say what she had to say. Victoria was here. Julian stiffened. "What? When?" "About an hour ago." Amara gestured to the torn pieces of paper in the trash can. "She offered me $2 million to leave you alone." "She did what?" Julian's voice was dangerously quiet. "I'll sue her for harassment. That's not all," Amara interrupted. "She said the board is considering replacing you as CEO because of me, because our relationship is damaging the company." Julian ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "That's not going to happen. The board can't remove me without cause, and dating someone they don't approve of isn't cause." "But what if she's right about the rest?" Amara asked, her voice breaking. "What if I'm damaging your reputation, your company, everything you've worked for?" "She's not right," Julian insisted. "Victoria is manipulating you, playing on your insecurities because she can't stand to see me happy with someone else. But your mother feels the same way," Amara pointed out, "and the media, and your business associates. They all think I'm wrong for you." Julian stepped closer, gently tilting her chin up so she would meet his eyes. "The only person whose opinion matters on who's right for me is me. And I choose you, Amara. I love you." Tears filled Amara's eyes. "I love you too. That's why this is so hard." Julian's heart sank. "You're breaking up with me." "I don't want to," Amara admitted, tears spilling down her cheeks. "But I don't see how this works, Julian. Our worlds are too different. The pressure will never stop. It will, Julian promised. We just have to weather the storm together. Amara shook her head sadly. You say that now, but what about in 6 months, a year, when your business keeps suffering because of me? When you keep having to defend me to your mother, your friends, your colleagues? I don't care about any of that, Julian insisted. But you should care, Amara argued. Your company isn't just about you. It employs thousands of people. Your father built it from nothing. I can't be the reason it suffers. Julian took her hands again, desperate to make her understand. Listen to me. If Davenport Industries can't survive me being in love with a kind, intelligent, hard-working woman, then maybe it doesn't deserve to survive at all. Amara looked shocked at his words. You don't mean that. I do, Julian said firmly. I've spent my entire adult life putting the company first, sacrificing my happiness, my personal life, everything for its success. I'm done letting it dictate how I live or who I love. He led her to the sofa, sitting beside her and keeping hold of her hands. My father worked himself to death for Davenport Industries. On his deathbed, do you know what he said to me? I should have taken more vacations. That was his big regret. Not that he'd failed at business, but that he'd failed at living. Amara listened quietly, tears still streaming down her face. I don't want that to be me, Julian continued passionately. I don't want to reach the end of my life and regret letting you go because I was afraid of what people might think or say. But what about... No more buts, Julian interrupted gently. I love you, Amara Johnson. All of you. Your kindness, your integrity, your passion for teaching, the way you see the real me behind all the trappings of wealth and status. I won't give that up. Not for Victoria, not for my mother, not for the board, not for anyone. Amara's resolve was weakening. She wanted so badly to believe him, to believe they could overcome the obstacles facing them. What about the media attention? She asked. The lies they write about me. We'll handle it together, Julian promised, and it will die down eventually. Something new will catch their attention. And your mother? Julian smiled slightly. She'll come around when she sees how happy you make me, and if she doesn't, well, that's her loss. Amara took a deep breath. Your world and mine are so different, Julian. I don't know if I can fit into yours, and I don't want you to give up. Yours for me. Then we'll create a new world, Julian suggested. One that has elements of both, one that's uniquely ours. The hope in his eyes was infectious. Amara felt her fears beginning to recede in the face of his unwavering conviction. Do you really believe we can make this work? She asked softly. No, we can, Julian replied without hesitation. If we're together. Amara searched his face, looking for any sign of doubt. There was none. Only love, determination, and absolute certainty. Okay, she whispered finally. Julian's face lit up. Okay? Amara nodded, a tremulous smile breaking through her tears. I'm scared, but I'm more scared of losing you. So yes, okay. Let's try to make this work. Together. Julian pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as relief and joy washed over him. He'd almost lost her. The thought was unbearable. I promise you won't regret this, he murmured into her hair. We're going to prove everyone wrong. Even Victoria? Amara asked, her voice muffled against his chest. Julian smiled grimly. Especially Victoria. The next morning, Julian called an emergency board meeting at Davenport Industries. As the board members filed into the conference room, their expressions ranged from curious to concerned. Thank you all for coming on. Such short notice, Julian began once everyone was seated. I've called this meeting to address some rumors that have been circulating. Rumors about my leadership and the future of this company. The board members exchanged glances, confirming Julian's suspicion that Victoria's claims weren't entirely unfounded. Someone had been planting seeds of doubt. Let me be clear, Julian continued. My personal life has no bearing on my ability to lead this company. The fact that I'm dating someone who doesn't come from wealth or privilege doesn't impair my judgment or my commitment to Davenport Industries. An older board member cleared his throat. Julian, no one is questioning your abilities, but the optics of your recent relationship have raised concerns among some investors. The optics? Julian repeated with barely concealed contempt. You mean the tabloid stories, the gossip? Since when does this company make decisions based on gossip? Since those stories began affecting our stock price, another board member pointed out. The Suntech deal falling through didn't help. Julian smiled slightly. Funny you should mention Suntech. He opened a folder and slid copies of a document across the table. This is a preliminary agreement signed by Suntech CEO Martin Wells this morning. They have agreed to our acquisition offer. Improved by just 10%, not the 15% I originally offered. Murmurs of surprise rippled through the room. But I thought they'd decided to go with Chen Global, someone said. They reconsidered. After I pointed out certain ethical concerns about Chen's business practices, Julian explained. Turns out Marcus Chen had been spreading misinformation about our company's stability, possibly with inside help. He let the implication hang in the air. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. Now, Julian continued, I'd like to address the elephant in the room. Yes, I'm in a relationship with Amara Johnson. She's a teacher in training who also works in event coordination. She comes from a working-class background. She's also intelligent, kind, and the best thing that's happened to me in years. If anyone has a problem with that, I suggest you sell your shares now because I have no intention of ending this relationship to appease outdated notions of who I should or shouldn't date. Silence fell over the room. Finally, Richard Harmon, the oldest board member and a friend of Julian's father, spoke up. Your father would be proud of you, son, he said unexpectedly. Not for the Suntech deal, though that's impressive, but for standing up for what matters to you. He never managed to do that himself. Julian was stunned by the comment. Richard had always seemed the most traditional of the board members. The board doesn't have any right to dictate your personal life, Richard continued, and frankly, anyone suggesting otherwise should be ashamed. William Davenport built this company on innovation and integrity, not gossip and prejudice. Gradually, other board members voiced their agreement. The tide was turning. By the end of the meeting, Julian had secured not only their support for his relationship but also approval for a bold new direction for the company, expanding their green energy division with Suntech's technology at its center. As the board members filed out, Julian's assistant Megan entered with an urgent message. Marcus Chen is on line 1. He sounds furious. Julian smiled, picking up the phone. Chen, to what do I owe the pleasure? You underhanded bastard, Marcus spat. You stole Suntech right from under us. I didn't steal anything, Julian replied calmly. I simply presented them with facts they weren't aware of, like how you and Victoria were spreading lies about my company's stability to gain an advantage. I can't prove that, Marcus said, but his voice held a note of uncertainty. Actually, I can, Julian informed him. Victoria made the mistake of approaching my girlfriend with a bribe. We have the torn check with her signature, and Amara is willing to testify about their conversation. I wonder how the business community would react to that kind of corporate espionage. There was silence on the other end. Here's what's going to happen, Julian continued. You and Victoria are going to back off, completely. No more stories leaked to the press. No more attempts to undermine my company or my relationship. In return, I won't pursue legal action for your unethical business practices. You're bluffing, Marcus tried, but his voice lacked conviction. Try me, Julian challenged. I've spent years playing by rules that never really suited me. I'm done with that now. So unless you want to see just how ruthless I can be when someone threatens what I care about, I suggest you accept my offer. After a tense moment, Marcus grudgingly agreed and hung up. Julian sat back in his chair, feeling more energized than he had in months. Standing up for himself and for Amara felt right in a way that playing the expected corporate game never had. His phone rang again. This time, it was his mother. I heard about the board meeting, Caroline said without preamble. Richard Harmon called me. Julian braced himself for another argument. And I've been thinking about what you said last night, Caroline continued, surprising him, about knowing what's best for you. Perhaps I've been overprotective since your father died. Julian was momentarily speechless. His mother rarely admitted to being wrong about anything. I still have concerns, Caroline added quickly, but Richard seems to think very highly of your Amara, and his judgment has always been sound. Wait, Julian said, confused. Richard hasn't. Even met Amara. Actually, he has, Caroline corrected him. Apparently, she's been tutoring his grandson in English for the past year. Richard says she's been a godsend for the boy, who has dyslexia. Julian shook his head in amazement. The world was smaller than he'd realized. I'd like to meet her properly, Caroline continued. Not at some chaotic charity event, but for dinner at my house this Sunday. Julian was wary but hopeful. I'll ask her. But Mom, you have to promise to really give her a chance. No thinly. Veiled insults or pointed questions about her background. I'm not making any promises, Caroline said, but there was a hint of humor in her voice. But I will try, Julian. For you. After hanging up, Julian immediately called Amara to share the day's developments. She was between classes, but answered right away. The board is on our side, he told her excitedly. And you'll never believe. This, my mother actually wants to have dinner with us. A real dinner, not an ambush. That's unexpected, Amara said cautiously. I know, and there's more. Apparently you've been tutoring Richard Harmon's grandson? Tommy? Yes, for about a year now. I didn't realize he was connected to your company. Julian laughed. Richard is our senior board member and was my father's best friend. He spoke up for us today. Well, Tommy's a great kid, Amara said. Anyone would speak up for him. Julian smiled, once again struck by Amara's natural humility. The point is, things are turning around. Victoria and Marcus have agreed to back off, the board is supportive, and even my mother is coming around. That's wonderful, Amara said, though she still sounded hesitant. But Julian, even if all the external pressure disappears, we still need to figure out how to blend our very different lives. I know, Julian acknowledged, and we will, one day at a time. After finishing his call with Amara, Julian spent the rest of the day finalizing the Suntech acquisition details. When he finally left the office that evening, he realized he hadn't felt this optimistic about the future in years. For the first time, his personal and professional lives both held promise and purpose. Sunday dinner at Caroline Davenport's mansion was tense at first. Amara wore a simple but elegant dress she'd borrowed from her sister, determined to be herself while still showing respect for the occasion. Caroline greeted her with a formal handshake and a scrutinizing gaze that made Amara feel like she was being evaluated. Julian squeezed her hand reassuringly as they followed his mother into the formal dining room. Julian tells me you're studying to be a teacher, Caroline said, as they sat down to the elaborate meal prepared by her personal chef. Yes, Amara confirmed. Elementary education. I'll finish my degree next year. A noble profession, Caroline remarked, surprising both Julian and Amara with her sincerity. My mother was a teacher before she married my father. I didn't know that, Julian said, raising his eyebrows. There's a lot you don't know about our family history, Caroline told him, perhaps because I've focused too much on our status and not enough on our roots. The conversation gradually became less strained as the meal progressed. Caroline asked thoughtful questions about Amara's studies and her work with dyslexic children. Amara, in turn, showed genuine interest in Caroline's charity work and the history of the Davenport family. By dessert, Julian was watching in amazement as his mother and girlfriend discussed educational reform with surprising alignment in their views. You know, Caroline said as coffee was served, when Julian was in elementary school, he struggled with reading. His father wanted to push him harder, but I insisted on finding him a tutor who specialized in different learning approaches. I didn't know that either, Julian said, giving his mother a curious look. The tutor changed everything for Julian, Caroline continued. She showed him that there wasn't something wrong with him, he just learned differently. Within 6 months, he went from the bottom of his class to the top. Amara smiled. That's what good teaching is all about, recognizing that every child has their own path to learning. Caroline nodded approvingly. Exactly. As they were preparing to leave, Caroline took Amara aside while Julian was getting their coats. I owe you an apology, she said directly. I judged you unfairly based on superficial concerns. You were protecting your son, Amara replied. I understand that. Perhaps, Caroline acknowledged, but I was also being a snob. The truth is, Julian has never looked at anyone the way he looks at you, not even Victoria. That should have told me everything I needed to know. Julian returned, looking between them with suspicion. "Everything okay here?" "Perfectly fine," his mother assured him. "I was just inviting Amara to join me for lunch next week. I'd like to show her some of the educational charities the Davenport Foundation supports. They might interest her professionally." Julian couldn't hide his shock, but quickly recovered. "That sounds great." As they drove away from the mansion, Julian glanced at Amara. "What just happened? My mother never warms up to anyone that quickly." Amara laughed. "We found common ground. She cares about education, and so do I." "It's more than that," Julian mused. "I think she actually likes you." "Is that so hard to believe?" Amara teased. Julian pulled her hand to his lips, kissing it gently. "Not at all. It's impossible not to love you. I'm living proof of that." Over the next few months, Julian and Amara settled into a rhythm that honored both of their worlds. Julian scaled back his 70-hour work weeks to make time for dinners at Amara's apartment and weekends with her family. Amara, meanwhile, gradually grew more comfortable in Julian's social circles, finding unexpected allies among his friends and business associates who appreciated her fresh perspective and genuine nature. The media eventually lost interest in their relationship when no scandals materialized. Occasionally, a photo would appear of them grocery shopping or attending one of Amara's school functions, but the sensationalized headlines faded away. Victoria and Marcus maintained their distance, especially after their rushed wedding ended in an even more rushed divorce just 3 months later. Rumors circulated that Marcus had discovered Victoria was only interested in his money and connections, an irony not lost on Julian, who felt nothing but relief that he'd escaped a similar fate. 6 months after their first dinner at Caroline's mansion, Julian invited Amara to a weekend getaway at his rarely used beach house in the Hamptons. It was a perfect June day when they arrived, the ocean breeze gentle and the sun warm on their skin. "This place is beautiful," Amara said as they walked along the private beach. "Why don't you come here more often?" Julian shrugged. "Work always seemed more important, but I'm rethinking my priorities these days." They continued walking, comfortable in their silence. When they reached a small cove with a spectacular view of the sunset, Julian suddenly stopped. "Amara," he said, his voice unusually serious. "These past months with you have been the happiest of my life," she smiled. "Mine too. When we met, I thought my life was over. Being left at the altar seemed like the worst possible humiliation." Julian took her hands in his. "Now I know it was the best thing that ever happened to me. It led me to you." Amara's heart began to race as Julian lowered himself to one knee on the sand. "I'm not proposing because it's expected, or because it looks good on paper, or because it's the next logical step," he said, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "I'm proposing because I cannot imagine my life without you in it. You've shown me what real love looks like. Not the superficial kind I thought was enough before, but deep, honest, challenging love that makes me want to be a better man every day." He opened the box to reveal a ring with a simple solitaire diamond, elegant but not ostentatious, exactly Amara's style. "Amara Johnson, will you marry me?" Tears filled Amara's eyes as emotion overwhelmed her. This man who could have had anyone, who had been raised in a world so different from hers, was looking at her like she was the most precious thing in his universe. "Yes," she whispered, then more confidently, "Yes, Julian, I will marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger and stood to kiss her, Amara felt a sense of rightness that transcended all the doubts and fears that had plagued them. Their path hadn't been easy, and there would be more challenges ahead, but together they were stronger than any obstacle. "I love you," Julian murmured against her lips. "More than I ever thought possible." "I love you too," Amara replied, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Always." The sun set over the ocean, painting the sky in brilliant shades of pink and gold, a perfect backdrop for the beginning of their life together. Not as people from different worlds forced to choose between them, but as partners creating their own world, one built on love, respect, and the unshakable belief that they were meant to be. 1 year later, Amara stood in a small room of the beachside chapel, looking at herself in the mirror. Her wedding dress was simple but beautiful, an elegant ivory gown that made her feel like a princess without being over the top. A knock at the door announced her sister Lisa. "You look stunning," Lisa said, tears in her eyes. "Julian is going to lose his mind when he sees you." Amara smiled nervously. "Is everyone here?" "Everyone," Lisa confirmed. "Your students, Julian's board members, even Victoria showed up, though she's sitting in the back looking miserable." Amara laughed. "I'm surprised she came at all. Probably hoping for another runaway bride situation," Lisa joked. "She's going to be disappointed." Another knock and Caroline Davenport entered, elegant in a pale blue suit. Over the past year, she and Amara had developed a genuine friendship, bonding over their shared interest in educational reform. Caroline had even become a major donor to the school where Amara now taught full-time. "You look beautiful, my dear," Caroline said warmly, embracing Amara. "I have something for you." She handed Amara a small box. Inside was a delicate pearl hairpin. "These were my grandmother's, the teacher. I thought you might like to wear them today." Amara was touched by the gesture. "I'd be honored." As Caroline helped Lisa secure the pearls in Amara's updo, Amara reflected on the journey that had brought her to this day. From that chance meeting with a heartbroken man at a failed wedding to becoming his wife, it seemed like something out of a fairy tale. Except their story wasn't about a poor girl being rescued by a rich prince. It was about two people from different worlds finding in each other exactly what they needed and building a bridge between those worlds with love, patience, and respect. Her father had died when she was young, so Robert, Julian's best friend, had offered to walk her down the aisle. When he appeared at the door to escort her to the ceremony, his eyes widened in appreciation. "Julian is one lucky man," Robert said, offering his arm. "We both got lucky," Amara replied, taking a deep breath as the wedding music began. The small chapel was filled with people from all parts of their lives, Amara's students and their parents, her colleagues from the school, Julian's business associates, and friends, both their families. But Amara saw only Julian, waiting for her at the altar with an expression of such pure joy that it brought tears to her eyes. As Robert placed her hand in Julian's, he whispered, "You two were meant for each other." Julian squeezed her hand gently, his eyes never leaving hers. "You're so beautiful," he whispered. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They had written their own vows, promises not just of love and fidelity, but of partnership, of supporting each other's dreams, of building a life that honored both their pasts while creating a shared future. "A year and a half ago, I thought I knew what love was," Julian said, his voice strong and clear. "I was wrong. Love isn't about finding someone who fits a checklist or who moves in the same circles. It's about finding someone who sees the real you and loves you anyway. Someone who challenges you to be better while accepting you exactly as you are. Amara, you are that person for me. You turned my worst day into the best thing that ever happened to me." Amara's voice trembled slightly as she spoke her vows. "Julian, when we met, I thought we were too different to ever truly understand each other. I was wrong. Beneath the surface differences, we share the same values, the same dreams, the same capacity for love. You taught me that real connections transcend background, wealth, or status. You've shown me a world I never thought I'd be part of, but more importantly, you've created a new world with me, one where we both belong exactly as we are." As they exchanged rings and were pronounced husband and wife, Amara felt a sense of completion. Their journey hadn't been easy, but that made this moment all the more precious. At the reception, held on the beach behind Julian's, now their Hamptons, house friends and family celebrated their union with genuine joy. Even Victoria, who had come perhaps hoping for drama, seemed subdued when she saw the unmistakable love between the newlyweds. Caroline surprised everyone by giving a heartfelt toast. "When Julian was a little boy, he once asked me how you know, when you've found the right person to marry. I told him what my mother told me, that you know when you can't imagine your life without them. Today, seeing my son with Amara, I understand the true meaning of those words. Some love stories are written in the stars, meant to be despite every obstacle. This is one of those stories." Later, as they danced under the stars, Julian held Amara close. "Happy?" he asked. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied honestly. When I was standing at that altar the day Victoria left, I thought my life was over, Julian mused. I couldn't have imagined that a year and a half later, I'd be grateful to her for walking away. Amara laughed softly. Should we send her a thank you? Note, I think our happiness is thanks enough, Julian replied, twirling her under the twinkling lights. Though I do wonder sometimes, if she hadn't left, would we still have met? Would you still have been the one to find me in that empty ballroom? I like to think so, Amara said thoughtfully. Some things are just meant to be. Julian kissed her gently, his eyes reflecting all the love in his heart. Like us. As the celebration continued around them, Julian and Amara remained in their own world, two hearts that had found their way to each other against all odds. Their love story hadn't been easy or conventional, but it was theirs, real, deep, and built to last through whatever challenges life might bring their way. Because some loves truly are meant to be.